I was a freshman in high school, and I was bused to Madison Park High in Roxbury, which is outside of Dudley Square. I grew up in Brighton, which is a predominantly white Irish Catholic, white Irish Italian, probably Irish and Italian Catholic neighborhoods. Boston, one of the neighborhoods of Boston. We had some, they had the METCO program, so we had some interaction with the kids from junior high school that came in on the buses to the junior high school, the Thomas Alfred Edison that I went to. But then it was under forced busing. We were forced to leave the neighborhoods, and certain kids were picked, and certain kids weren't. And I was one of the kids that was picked to go.
Okay, what were the living conditions like during this time, like in your neighborhood?
Probably lower middle class, kind of white, poor, not really rich neighborhood. There was some rich sections, but most of us, lived in the projects and stuff like that. So it was probably lower middle class to lower economic class. Yeah, that was my neighborhood. Okay.
So how did busing affect racism and discrimination in the Boston area?
Well, I think that Boston was always somewhat of a racially divided city. And it seemed to have very ethnic and racial boundaries and lines in the neighborhoods. And I think that this was generations people were brought up this way. And so they resisted the change. And the people that had money were able to leave and flee. And the people that didn't had to stay and fight it out.
So what were some of the arguments by the white students and parents against busing?
Well, I think primarily the argument was the kids should be forced to leave the neighborhood. But to say that it wasn't racially motivated would be a lie. So I think that the parents were racist, and I think the kids, since the parents were racist, the kids were too.
So the beginning of the whole, action of busing in Boston really started with the Racial Imbalance Act in 1965, but forced busing didn't actually start until 1974. So do you have any idea why maybe it took so long for the school system to actually enact busing?
Well, I can only theorize, but my theory would be that the school committee, which is the school committee in Boston, it was pretty much a death sentence to enact it. So they probably didn't want to they wanted to get reelected. So they avoided it as long as they could, and eventually, the people, the liberals, or the so-called liberals at the time, took it to court, and through all the appeals, finally Judge Garrity had court-ordered, because that's what it was called at the time. It wasn't just forced busing, it was called court-ordered busing, because it was court-ordered.
Okay. Do you believe busing was a good idea?
No.
Why?
Well, I should rephrase that. I think that it was a great idea. That doesn't work.
Poorly executed. Yeah.
That doesn't really work, because racism and bigotry is not something you can force out of people. It's either there or it isn't. And I think that the violence that ensued really, white and black kids, really wasted a generation of kids' education, because there was no education going on because there was tons of violence.
Do you think that the black kids being bused into white neighborhoods were as opposed to it as the white kids being bused into black neighborhoods?
I didn't get a sense, because we were so racially divided, as to whether the black parents were as opposed as the white parents. The black kids were not happy about coming to our neighborhoods, as we were not as very happy about coming to theirs.
What were some of the long-term effects of busing on the poor communities of Boston?
Well, one of the things that they talked about was balance. And in my neighborhood, all the rich people left. So, um, I think the effect on the poor neighborhoods was that basically they were left to slug it out while the other people went to, you know, Milton and places like that and moved just outside of the city, Braintree and things like that.
Okay, so when I was doing research on this, one of the major arguments that they said was that a lot of the white parents said that they believed that they should have the right to choose where their kids went to school as opposed to the government choosing for them. Do you think this was actually one of their major causes, or do you really think it was mostly racially driven?
I think it was mostly racially driven.
Do you think that was even a factor at all?
I think it was a factor.
Okay. In retrospect, or, well, to the best of your ability, what were some of the white misconceptions of the black students coming into your neighborhoods by you or any of your peers at the time?
Misconceptions. I think we thought that they would kind of, you know, because it was our neighborhood, we looked at it as the neighborhood, our neighborhood. It's sort of a turf thing, like they're invading our turf. And I think that actually, because I went to the black neighborhood, I think they felt the same way. So it was like, because Boston is still actually very racially divided, but back then it was much more so. I think that they looked at it as it was more like a turf thing, like they're coming into our turf, kind of a thing, and they felt the same way about us coming into theirs.
But neither side really chose to acknowledge the fact that it wasn't really by choice. It was, you know, by the government making them.
Yeah, but we didn't care. Yeah. No, neither side did.
So what were the living conditions like for some of the minority groups in Boston during and after busing?
Well, I think as a white kid, that the thing that I probably had the most problem with now is that, you know, the media coverage at the time really focused on the white parents because they were more vocal and active. Charlestown parents specifically, South Boston. Brighton too, actually. Both very Irish Catholic neighborhoods, all three of them. And, you know, I was on the bus over in Madison Park with bricks coming through the windows, and there was no TV cameras there, you know what I mean? And they were throwing rocks through our windows too, and there was no news cameras there. So I think, as a child, I think I was bitter about that, but it was a national news story, and I think news stories are driven by. But I don't think that anybody. I don't think that anybody really. I think the only change would be in the neighborhoods was the white flight. So I guess it became more racially balanced at first because black people stayed because they didn't have, you know, socially or economically they didn't have the wherewithal. So the white flight was real, and a lot of the white people who had money left. So it sort of balanced it out, but it sort of did it in a screwed up way.
Okay. So do you think that growing up during this kind of racial division and also this kind of major event where they started to try to, you know, get integration into schools, do you think this affected the way, you know, you came out as an adult, like in your life?
Yeah, probably.
In what way?
Probably in the way that we had to grow up probably too fast and too young. You know, the first 2 years of busing, it was, you know, I was in a black school, and it was very violent. So I think that in that way, so how has it affected me as an adult? I guess it affected me that mostly because there really was not much education going on. The public school system was really just, you know, at that time that was the problem. There was so much, you know, kind of violence and you know, and all this kind of tension and metal detectors and all this stuff. There wasn't a hell of a lot of learning going on. And I think that that's probably how it affected me long term.
So, do you remember if, during the time where you were getting bused to Madison Park High, if you made any friends with any of the black kids, or were
I
you
did.
really, separated with the
I
white
did,
kids?
and we both got shit for it, actually.
Can you tell me a little bit about that relationship?
His name was Ronnie, and we just kind of hit it off. He was a good dude, and we skipped school one day and we went somewhere. I don't remember what we did, and we went down the combat zone or whatever we did, playing pinball down the combat zone, which was a whole other historical place. And we both got back to school. He got a lot of shit from the black kids about hanging out with me, and I got a lot of shit from my friends still. I actually did not cave into the pressure, but eventually he did.
Do you feel like
our friendship sort of kind of ended?
Do you feel like as time went on, it was maybe easier to make relationships with the black students, or did it just kind of stay as divided as when it started?
As time went on, maybe it did make it a little easier. In some ways.
Okay. Do you think that busing caused more students to drop out of high school during the 70s?
Undoubtedly.
Did you know anyone who dropped out of high school because of busing?
Probably half a dozen people.
Okay. So do you remember what steps President Ford took to stop forced busing? Because he was really opposed to busing. Do you remember anything that he did to try to...
No, I don't.
Okay.
I was only 14 years old, so I was not really like 18 or 19.
Do you believe Garrity's decision to force busing was justified?
Well, no.
Why?
Because sometimes you got to look at the whole thing. And the whole thing is that choice, because now, of course, forced busing has been removed in Boston. And choice works. So I do believe that somehow, instead of trying to pour everybody into the same box, I do believe that everybody should have the right. So in other words, if the black parents wanted to send their kids to Don Bosco or to Brighton High School, they certainly should have it should have been ensured that they had the right to do that. And if the white people wanted to send their kids to Madison Park High or to Forest Hills, it should have been ensured that they were able to do that. I would go along with that everybody has the right to send their kids to whatever school, and that right should have been protected by the judge, not forced.
So Boston was one of the first places to attempt integration through busing, and a lot of other places in the country was really successful, but in Boston it was, pretty much a failure, as you may have remembered. So do you think that there's any reason why it was maybe more successful in other places as opposed to in Boston?
Well, again, going back to, Boston has always probably been much more racially divided than a lot of people. A lot of places. Even as a young child, the kids from the North End, they didn't come in our neighborhood. And if they did, it was a problem. And we didn't go in theirs, really. Because if we did, it was a problem. And we were both white. I can remember kids from other neighborhoods giving me shit about dating girls in their neighborhood. White kids. So, Boston's always been this territorial. Brighton and Allston, Hyde Park, Roslindale, all these
not even necessarily
sections.
racially, just
Yeah, I mean,
separated.
well, a lot of it is racial, but they have been very, very sectarian, and sectioned off. And I think that that's probably why it was less successful.
I think that going back to the whole fierce pride of your neighborhoods or whatever. Do you think that maybe the parents who oppose busing should maybe not be seen as much as racist as they're portrayed because of the the fierce pride that they had for their neighborhood? Because I read a lot about this subject, and a lot of people said that maybe these people shouldn't be seen as racist because they were just protecting their neighborhoods, and I think a lot of people believe that.
Well, there's a whole thing, a cultural thing, even still today, I have cultural things kind of ingrained in me that some